Hi there, thanks so much for joining us. We're going to go ahead and get started. So you are exploring the intersection of the economic and social elements of cooperation. This webinar will last for 1 hour. If you just joined us, please press *2 to mute your line so we can avoid any background noise. Please note that you also have an option in your GoToWebinar menu where you can send your questions or raise your hand. So we will save questions until the end, but you can go ahead and type them in there if you'd like, or indicate by raising your hand that you would like to ask a question to the presenters at the end. So today we are exploring where the economic business aspects of cooperatives intersect with the social aspects of these enterprises. And we've got Dr. J.J. McMurtry and Dr. Laurie Mook here to speak to us today. So to give you a little bit of background, we, the Measuring the Cooperative Difference Research Network, we're a pan-Canadian multidisciplinary research network made up of practitioners and a variety of academics with different backgrounds. We are examining the cooperative difference by way of the social, economic, and environmental aspects of the enterprises. Every year we offer 6 free webinars, and the one coming up next will be on November 15th at 1 o'clock Eastern, and it's Creating a Better World, the Socio-Economic Impact of Cooperatives and Mutuals Globally. And Michelle Lefleur and Marianne Merien from Syracuse will be the presenters, and the registration is now open. So you can go ahead and visit our website. There's a link off the main page, or you'll see the direct link to the registration there. So our network has been running since 2010 and will run until 2015, funded by the Social Sciences and Humanities Research Council of Canada. If you have any suggestions for our winter webinar series that will run in January, February, and March, we would love to hear those. If you have any interesting initiatives within your cooperative or within your organization or your university, we would love to have an opportunity to share that through our network. So these are our featured speakers today. I'll introduce both of them, and then after I'll give JJ the floor to begin. So Dr. J. McMurtry is an associate professor in the Business and Society program at York University. Professor McMurtry's areas of specialization include cooperative theory and practice, alternative economics, the social economy, and social and political thought. He's one of the founders of Green Campus Co-ops and is a member of the National Research Cluster for the Measuring the Cooperative Difference Research Network. He's also editor of the book Living Economics, Perspectives on Canada's Social Economy. So today JJ will start things off by defining the social economy, so unpacking how these two concepts can be defined together and how cooperatives can be defined within the social economy. Laurie Mook will be our second presenter today. She's an assistant professor in the Nonprofit Leadership and Management program in the School of Community Resources and Development and research associate at the Lodestar Center for Nonprofit Innovation and Philanthropy at Arizona State University. Prior to moving to Arizona, Laurie was co-director of the Social Economy Center at the University of Toronto. She is co-author of What Counts? Social Accounting for Nonprofits and Cooperatives, now in its 2nd edition from Siegel Press, and also author of Understanding the Social Economy from the University of Toronto Press. Also coming up in January, she'll be releasing Accounting for Social Value, a new book printed by the University of Toronto Press. Her areas of interest are the social economy, nonprofits, cooperatives, and social enterprises, volunteerism, and social accounting. So Laurie will describe concepts of social and sustainability accounting and describe how cooperatives balance this type of measurement and performance evaluation in tandem with economic and business evaluation. So now I will give the floor to JJ so he can start us off today. And I'll ask, if you've just joined us, please press *2 to mute your line.
Hi, everybody. Thank you so much for attending. I hope you can hear me well. I'm going to try and, once Erin passes the controls over to me, to try and walk through some of the issues in the social economy, first of all, and then to try and talk about how those issues play out in the cooperative movement and how we can understand co-ops as being part of the social economy, and also how the concept of the social economy in some ways challenges concepts of cooperation. So I'm hoping to provoke some discussion and also to open up the conversation for Laurie's presentation as well, because I think she's going to present on some a very interesting model to try and count value within economic activity through social accounting. So I look forward to your questions and to Laurie's presentation. And again, thanks everybody for being here. So hopefully this slide will move forward for me. There we go. I wanted to start with the concept of the social economy for the first couple of slides because it's a concept that some people are familiar with, others less so, and I think it's actually a very important concept for practitioners in the co-op world, but also more broadly to understand, and to understand also the debates that occur within the concept of the social economy. And the term emerges from a very long history. People put it back. The first uses of the term are often cited in the late 19th, earliest 20th century. And it emerges and grows in popularity, especially in Europe, and much later in English-speaking world, especially in North America. But really what is at the core of the social economy, and I'll be talking about this throughout the presentation, is as capitalism emerges as a system that becomes more and more dominant in our economic practice, people are searching for a way to try and define something other than purely profit generating and profit focused economic activity. And there's a lot of struggles around how to think about that idea, and co-ops are a major part of it, as I'll talk about in a moment. But the social economy has become, in some circles, a catch-all phrase for this type of movement. And I don't want to ignore, as I talk about contemporary debates in the social economy, that there's a very long history to the development of this term over the last 120 years or so. But what I want to pull out today is where the idea of values, and by that I mean ethical or normative values, play an important role in the social economy, that social first piece of the phrase social economy. And really when we have debates in the social economy, what we're debating about is how much the social or these values modify the economy. And I'll explain that further as we go on, but what I mean by that is that there is general agreement amongst social economy practitioners and theoreticians around a sort of a negative definition of the social economy, which is that it's economic activity, as I have on the slide, with a social purpose directly controlled neither by the state or the for-profit logic of the market. But this is a negative definition because what it's trying to say is we're not state-controlled, and often in today's world we forget that that was a very dominant economic model from World War II on and even World War I with communism, but also various degrees of state-directed economic activity, but also the flip side, which is much more dominant today, the for-profit logic of the market. And so there's an attempt within the social economy. Sorry, getting background noise. Maybe people can star two to mute their line.
Somebody can talk to him, right?
So that the idea is that there's a for-profit logic for the market which has to be addressed because it's not fully meeting human needs, and same with the state control. And that's the last point on that slide, is that neither of those two models of state-directed economy or market-directed economy fully work in all circumstances. And the real question is, when do they work, when don't they work, and how do we know what would replace them and if that replacement is working? So the social economy fills that big sort of squishy middle between directly state-controlled and for-profit market activity. So the problem for social economy, however, is those very two terms. That is the idea that how do we blend the social with the economic and make something that's efficient at both activities. And the problem really is rooted in the idea that the second bullet point up there is that we generally think of economics like a math. It's value neutral. It's something that we can measure an activity, it's happening. And what we're trying to do is say, let's direct that some way through values. And the social economy is built to try and achieve or to complexify that economic activity through the imposition of values or other directives other than economics. But I want to be very clear, as I'll talk about in a little bit, that economics isn't value neutral. It's not a math. And in fact, the social economy is just one way of getting at the idea that economics is much more complex and social, even in the way that we think about it today. But what's clear for all practitioners and theoreticians of the social economy is that social values are complex, conditional, relational, and very hard to measure. And this is where Laurie's work, I think, is very exciting, is trying to do some on-the-ground measurement of these social values. And the problem with that complexity of the social values is that it's hard to measure those social values. And therefore, a lot of what the social economy and cooperatives, for that matter, spread when they're speaking to people who are not from the sector are economic figures. So one of the first things that most books and cooperatives and social economy start with is how big a sector of the economy either one is. And that's a way of what I talk about in some of my work, about appealing to the economic logic in order to justify social economy and cooperative activity, instead of immediately starting with what the values are and what social values these types of activities bring. And I think that's a real tension for the social economy and for definitions of the social economy. So when we think about trying to define the social economy, we really need to think about how is it that we can focus on the social and how do we measure it. So the definitional debate really rotates around that relationship between values and economics. And in Canada and the world, and as you travel around the world, as I've had the good fortune to do over the last couple of years, each area that you go to, including just different areas of Canada or even Ontario, there are different meanings that are attached to the term social economy depending on what people see as valuable, which is very interesting. So inside of the definitional debate in the social economy, there are multiple positions. And I want to highlight four because I think they're the dominant sort of four streams, and try and talk about how cooperatives fit into those. So some argue, first of all, that the way to define the social economy most broadly is in some ways the most simplistic way of measuring it. And by simplistic, I don't mean it's simple, but it's clear, and that is by their incorporated form. So we know what types of forms of businesses or organizations generally exist in the social economy, so it can be a way to identify them and say, well, if you're a nonprofit or a cooperative or a charity, then by virtue of your incorporation, you have to be bringing some sort of social value to your organization and to your economic activity, and therefore you're part of the social economy. The problem is that incorporation form doesn't always equal values. And the example that I like to choose is the Fraser Institute in Canada, which is incorporated as a nonprofit, but its whole raison d'etre is to argue against any sort of social economy broadly constructed, including tax breaks for nonprofits. So it's a very problematic idea to try and define social economy activity simply by the structural form. In response to this, some people say, well, the social focus then really, it doesn't matter about the incorporation form so much as having a social focus, and that is how we should identify social economy activity. But again, there's a problem with this type of definition because we don't all agree on what a social focus is. Jeffrey Sachs, for example, why I have his name there at the end, argues that any kind of economic activity is social. So a McDonald's appearing in Lagos is a social economy activity because you're providing jobs and social growth through economic growth. And clearly that's not what the social economy or cooperatives are trying to get at when they talk about having social value. So it sort of opens up a morass if we just say any social focus is fine if we don't have a definition of that particular social focus. There are also political definitions of the term. The one that's popular in Quebec and also in continental Europe is the idea of the solidarity economy, which stresses the social value as being really solidarity activity with marginalized groups, which is very appealing to lots of people because it's political. But the problem here is almost the reverse for lots of people, is questioning the economic validity of those forms and saying, well, you're really actually doing political work with a guise of economics underneath it. You're not doing real economic activity, or sustainable economic activity is often what people criticize this form for. And finally, there are definitions, which my own is based on a definition of focusing on democracy, and that is community voice and economic inclusion as determined by the members of the communities themselves, so that the way to measure the social value, to answer that problem in the second definition, is to say, well, the key value is democratic activity. And that's the most important piece to measure. Of course, the same sort of criticism can be launched that this is a political or a very narrow definition of social, and it can create problems as much as the other definitions. But really what I want to get at today is that all these definitions revolve around the idea of the importance of values. And the definition, that's the third bullet point up there that I'm trying to stress, I think is actually closest to the cooperative form, because it's stressing, as I'll talk about in a bit, the importance of democracy as a bulwark against simple state or for-profit logic. But again, the question is raised, how do we measure and identify values if we have all these debates? And even within each one of these broad definitional categories, there are problems around terms. So I want to turn to that idea now. So the idea of the social economy is the idea that values can and should modify economic practice. And I really want to be clear, because this is what I think cooperatives bring to the table and what the social economy in its best form does, is that it's a should, I bolded the term there, that we can't just have scare quotes around the idea of economics, but you can't just have economic activity without some sort of value behind it. But again, as I brought up at the beginning, how can values modify math, the math of economics as we conceptualize it? Well, the way around that, in my opinion at least, is that if we look at the definition of the economy, and I have one up there that fits with basically any textbook definition of the economy, the efficient production, distribution, and consumption of goods otherwise in short supply, then the value question, the should above, becomes, well, who defines what efficiency is? Who defines how we produce, distribute, and consume resources along the economic value chain? And if we ask that question, we get much closer, in my opinion, to understanding the social value within the social economy and also the social value that cooperatives bring within the social economy. In other words, the social economy forces us to ask questions around economic values and asks whether or not we can address those questions differently by identifying social need. So, where do co-ops fit in that sort of abstract theoretical framework? Well, the cooperative model is really one of the most important models of the social economy, both historically and in the contemporary context, I believe. And it's important because it's based on that very idea of principles, or as the co-op movement likes to call it, or values, that frame economic activity. And while I know that the 7 principles of cooperation, and we should all know them after the year that we've had in 2012, I want to sort of group them into 3 social innovations if we want to think about them. The first, which is often forgotten within co-ops, is the limited return on capital. That is that the priority of co-ops is supposed to be people over profits. It doesn't mean that co-ops can't be profitable in a common sense of the term, but that the value that co-ops are bringing is a social value to their memberships, an empowerment, if you like, no matter what kind of cooperative activity is engaged in, of members. And that leads to the second point, which is, well, how do you know that that's happening? How do we measure that? How do we see it? Well, we see it in democratic member ownership and control. And it's a very easy way to both ensure that that value is being realized, and secondly, to be able to measure that value in terms of the type of democratic activity that's happening within an organization. And third, the commitment of co-ops to education and open membership. So anybody can participate in co-ops, and also that co-ops have an obligation to their members to make sure that they are educated and spreading the word about co-ops, as the year 2012 has taught us, and spreading that model around the world. In other words, the values that are talked about in the social economy are institutionalized within the cooperative model and institutionalized within economic practice, the co-op form. And I really think that that integration of values within economic practice is the key co-op innovation and advantage, both within the social economy, but more generally just in terms of recent history. So what do some of those innovations look like? I'm assuming from the crowd that we have here that most people are familiar with the co-op innovations, but I just wanted to mention a couple because really these innovations have come back, as I'll talk about in a second, to haunt the co-ops. Their success has almost meant that co-ops have to innovate in order to continue their difference. So if we think of microcredit, which is so popular now, of course, credit unions were the primary microcredit innovators and still are in most parts of the world the major source of good microcredit as opposed to the microcredit that's critiqued throughout the literature. The idea of economic democracy, which is so popular now, has, of course, been part of the worker co-op movement from the beginning. The idea of consumer rights and consumer discounts and quality of goods and transparency for consumers are also a result of Rochdale, the original consumer co-op, who started because there were violations of food quality inside of England in 1844. And then, of course, the idea of local or regional production, which is, of course, popular today, is a central feature of the agricultural or producer co-ops, which emerged at the turn of the century. So really what we see in the way that co-ops have developed historically is that the social value integration into economic activity through membership and democratic control is really the co-op innovation over the last 100 years. And again, as I mentioned in the definition of the social economy, when you focus on the importance of democracy, you really see the social value that co-ops bring to economic activity through that relatively simple but complex concept of democratic control. So just a couple more slides, and I'm turning it over to Laurie. But what is the co-op advantage then today? And as I mentioned, the recent past has seen many of the advantages socially that co-ops had, because of their proven success, have been accepted by a wider community. We can think of corporate social responsibility, the broad concept of social enterprise, and even the concept of the social economy more generally, have all been part of this broadening of the economic value framework, a recognition that we need a richer sense of economics with a social focus. And the co-op advantage has been based on their ability to be innovators and leaders in the innovations around economics and values. But I would argue today that one of the last remaining vestiges, which isn't a bad one, but of co-op advantage is the idea of member democracy, as lots of the other innovations have been appropriated, how perfectly is up for debate, but appropriated by other institutions. And we really have to ask, where are co-ops innovating in the contemporary context? And I think, as I said before, Laurie's going to mention one way in which they are, but also other social economy organizations are innovating in the same way. So I just put up a quick list of 5 areas where co-ops have been innovating recently, and I think most people know of these innovations, but they're worth mentioning. The idea of multi-stakeholder co-ops, which is expanding the concept of democracy and that social value that I've been talking about throughout this talk. Mondragon, again, is democratizing and spreading globally the model of cooperation, but there's been criticisms of how effective that has been, which we can talk about in the question section. New generation co-ops are very popular, especially in the United States, but also here in Canada. And their innovations, I would argue, are slightly negative, although maybe necessary, in that they're innovating around rewarding capital with a greater democratic role. And mergers, which we've all seen, especially in the credit union movement, but all over the place elsewhere, is also a negative, in my opinion, social innovation, while a positive economic innovation. And that is because the distance of merged organizations from their members can be significant and creates social issues about control, democratic control. But to end on a positive note, the alternative energy co-ops, which is the particular area that I'm working on with Judith Lipp from Trek for the CCA on this research suite, I really think there's a potential of these alternative energy co-ops to re-democratize and to build on that co-op strength, power and power distribution in the Canadian context. And also they've been experimenting in Europe with this form. So I think I'm not trying to end by saying that it's all dark and co-ops aren't innovating. I think they're actually really exciting innovations on the ground. And really, as a last point there is articulating, innovations are in the co-op DNA. but which values is the question are in the co-op DNA as we move forward, and how does this continue to provide a leadership role for co-ops within the social economy? So that's all for me. I look forward to your questions.
Thanks so much, JJ. So I think that you've given us a very thorough context from which we can jump off to have Laurie be able to give us some of those more the operational and how it is that we institutionalize these types of accounting. So Laurie, I will hand it over to you, and you can go ahead and get started. You can press *2 to unmute.
Great. Thank you very much, Erin, and thank you so much to yourself and to the Measuring the Cooperative Difference Research Network for inviting me to talk on social accounting and to join the panel with JJ. I'm going to start off with first looking at generally what is the concept of social accounting, why do it, and then just some little hints and tips on how to put it into action. I always start off with a general overview of accounting as financial accounting as we know it. My first degree was in financial accounting, so prior to getting into academia, I was a professional accountant. And as most of us know, accounting is also, as JJ was talking about economics, is also seen as an objective, sort of neutral, value-free, sort of technical enterprise. So it's basically a set of rules that tells us how we put numbers together. But as we'll see again, accounting as economics is definitely not neutral. There are certain decisions made over what is included in accounting statements, what is excluded, and by looking at those particular decisions, we can see how certain interpretations of social reality are portrayed. And this, of course, has implications for policy and decision making. So the main point here is that accounting is not neutral. So what is included and excluded in accounting models shapes a particular perception of reality. And as a result, accounting can be also seen as a driver of behavior. So for example, if it's not counted, it's not recognized, and we can think of that old the saying, what gets measured gets managed. And thus we can, in thinking about social accounting statements, we can also think about accounting as a driver of behavior and accounting as a change agent. Okay, so what is social accounting? Social accounting is based on a critique of traditional accounting, on the narrowness of accounts, what's in and what's out, and we're going to broaden the domain of items that is included in accounting statements. So this is a definition that comes from our book, What Counts? Social Accounting for Nonprofits and Cooperatives. So social accounting is a systematic analysis of the effects of an organization on its communities of interests or stakeholders, with stakeholder input as part of the data that are analyzed for the accounting statement. It can be both quantitative and qualitative, and it can be supplemental to reports or integrated. We do prefer the integrated reports, so this is where you're combining financial reports with social and environmental information so that you can place it into context. Often if you have supplemental reports that are separate to the financial reports, sometimes it's just more of a PR exercise. It's also being called greenwashing. It's just, sort of select stories that kind of make an organization look good, but without putting it into context with its economic impacts. So something to keep in mind as we think about different accounting models and social accounting models is the behaviors that are promoted in our current accounting models and why, and then what behaviors that we want to promote or change, and how we can take that into consideration in developing new models of social accounting. So why would we want to do social accounting? Again, it seems pretty clear-cut for cooperatives and social organizations that there's much more to these organizations than the economic or financial performance, that we do want to take into consideration the social and environmental factors and integrate those three together. We want to look at how all three work together in order to document and monitor performance and progress towards mission. And it's another way also to kind of emphasize the cooperative difference, to legitimize the cooperative structure. If you've set up a social accounting model that is in line with the cooperative principles, and that's your goal, is to move towards those principles, then that in reporting and measuring and monitoring those behaviors, that should be beneficial in helping to move towards those indicators and those factors.
So I'm sorry to interrupt you for 1 second. I think that someone has joined us. I'll just ask that they press *2 to mute their line. Thanks.
Okay, great. So to start, what organizations have done in this process is just, if they haven't really thought about this approach before, is just to kind of do a brainstorming session and bring together a bunch of different stakeholders in the organization. So you'll have employees and members and clients, board members, suppliers, and so forth, and just to brainstorm about all the different ways your organization impacts the community. And then focusing on also the 3 categories of economic, social, and environmental. And then also think about all the inputs, because in the traditional accounting, we're just taking into consideration monetary inputs. But for cooperatives and nonprofits, for example, the contributions of members and volunteers are very important, a very important resource, as well as in-kind contributions. You can ask questions such as, what difference are we making in the community? If our organization wasn't here, how would the community look different? And again, always focus in on the economic, social, and environmental value added of the organization. And you'll find that you're going to come up with a long list of items, but some, of course, are going to be more significant than others, and you need to decide which of these impacts are the most significant in order to make the process manageable. Here's some other guiding questions to think about. You can think about direct and indirect impacts of the organization. So in terms of direct, that relates to the goods and services that are provided. Also think about if you're providing goods and services free of charge or at reduced rate to others. That's another contribution that you're making. And in terms of indirect impacts, so when members contribute social or unpaid labor to your organization, what benefits might they gain as a result of performing that activity? So, for example, they may gain in areas of skills development, things like that. That would be another contribution of your organization. This is based on a study we did earlier on the Waterloo Cooperative Residents organization. So we did a social accounting statement for them and looked at all the different outputs of the organization. These are just some examples. Economic outputs, they provide housing and related services. So this is the information you would typically find on your traditional accounting statements, and then we're going to broaden it to include social outputs and environmental outputs. So in terms of social outputs, they have a lot of member skills training. The organization also provides consultations to cooperative sectors, so to other housing cooperatives, which is a benefit. So that also comes in line with helping other cooperatives in the cooperative sector. Preferential pricing was another issue that was a social impact for their organization. In terms of environmental outputs, you can look at things such as energy efficiency and different ways of recycling and using resources and how that might have an impact on the environment. But what's also important is to look at how all of those impacts and benefits are then distributed to different stakeholder groups. So you can see in terms of the Waterloo Cooperative Residents that the stakeholder groups included employees, residents, the cooperative sector, government providers of capital, and the organization itself. So we look at how employees receive benefits in terms of their pay, wages, benefits, and training. The residents themselves receive benefits in terms of a lower cost of accommodations, and that's made possible because they all have to contribute and contribute labor in running the organization. They're learning about how to run an organization, developing skills that way, how to run a democratic organization, creating a sense of community, and they also get some financial benefits in terms of property tax credits on their tax returns. The cooperative sector benefited in terms of co-op development, consultation to cooperative sector that I mentioned before. And the government also benefits the public sector in terms of taxes that are paid from the organization. They also were able to provide their housing in the summer months to house war refugees, which was also a benefit. And then providers of capital to the interest earned on their investments in the organization and the organization itself. Other aspects you might want to think about in terms of developing a social accounting model, and again, you're thinking about what kind of behaviors do you want to promote and what are we working towards. You might think about areas such as environmental sustainability, equity, which would be both intra and intergenerational, education, training and information, cooperation among cooperatives, and concern for community. And these, again, you can relate back to the cooperative principles and make that sort of as a framework for guiding what you include in your social accounting model. So just in summary, just talking about how social accounting is a framework that can be used in different ways, keeping in mind the general idea of that it is a driver of behavior and can be used as a change agent. So you can use it to reflect economic, social, and environmental impacts and look at how they are all interconnected. It also is a way to encourage stakeholder dialogue because you're involving the different stakeholder groups within the model and getting their feedback on impacts and so forth. It increases transparency of the organization, promotes organizational learning. It's a way to change behaviors and also to support mission. And so I'll leave it at that, and hopefully you'll have some questions in a few moments. Thank you very much.
Hi, thanks so much, Laurie. So we have had a few questions come in so far, which means that we've got a little bit of time left during our hour together where we can address some of the questions that have come in and also invite folks to be able to unmute themselves and ask questions off the cuff as well. But I'll start with Fred. If you're there, you can press *2 to unmute your phone.
Hi there, can you hear me?
Yes, so if you could just introduce yourself, tell us where you're from.
Sure. My name is Fred Conti. I'm a co-op development officer with the Saskatchewan Co-operative Association. And I just had a question for JJ. You highlight the importance of social values when it comes to defining the social economy. For cooperatives particularly, in your experience, do you have, I guess you find the type of co-op affects the social values they adhere to and the principles they focus on? For example, an alternative energy co-op focuses on particular principles and values versus, say, an agricultural supply co-op.
Right. Thank you so much for that question. For me, that's why when I was talking about the definitions of the social economy, why the principle of democratic member control and ownership is so crucial to co-ops, because when you think about social values, as you're rightly pointing out, there's such a broad range of potential social values that any one group could try and bring into focus. That it's really important for organizations, specifically co-ops, because they're most often involved in economic activity as well, that they're allowed to focus on their social values as well as their bottom line, so to speak, and to be able to articulate those two things clearly and carefully. So yes, it would be a different social value for alternative energy co-ops than it might be for, like Laurie was mentioning, the housing co-op, which might be different than a food co-op. But ultimately, where their advantage lies is in the ability to innovate around both social values and economic practice in order to bring those social values home, if you'd like. So one of the things that's happening in Ontario, which is tricky for alternative energy cooperatives, is where are the members? What role do members play? And how do we articulate those values that members see in alternative energy outside of the obvious general social value of providing green and clean energy? So one of the things that is happening within the co-ops in that sector, they're trying to innovate around membership and membership participation to greater or lesser success. So I hope that answers your question.
Thank you.
And Fred, you can go ahead with your question for Laurie as well.
Sure. Laurie, thank you for the presentation. I was just curious for the social accounting approach, from a cooperative perspective, is this approach useful in making sure that co-ops adhere to the larger principles of, like, say, member economic control or concern for community? And can you think of specific examples you can give for organizations or co-ops that have done this to make sure that they're following the co-op principles?
Okay, yes, I think it definitely can. I mean, you have to come up with what indicators would show you that that's being done. And that's also something, I think, through the research network, as some of the exploration that's being done on how can you actually demonstrate the cooperative difference and measure different aspects of cooperative principles. There are a number of different organizations that have done that and are producing sort of larger sustainability reports, but include items that would relate back to measuring different cooperative principles. So, for example, in the UK, there's the Cooperative Group, and they produce a very good social accounting report and also a little 4-page summary document. And for example, in those 4 pages, one page is dedicated to our cooperative difference. So it shows different indicators it has used in order to demonstrate that. Other organizations that are producing sustainability reports and also include indicators that relate to being a cooperative would be, for example, Van City produces a really great report, and they've been doing it for almost 15 years. Their sustainability report. The cooperators have also started to produce a sustainability report, as well as, and if you're thinking about smaller organizations, like there's a worker cooperative called the Sustainability Solutions Group that also produces a very good sustainability or social accounting report.
Thank you.
Thanks so much. So now, Justin, if you can press star 2 to unmute, introduce yourself.
Hi there, Justin Ellerby here. I am a student in the MBA Community Economic Development program at Cape Breton University and a lifelong housing cooperator. I have a couple questions, but I'll just just ask the one for JJ right now, which is in terms of cooperative virtues being co-opted, so to speak. This is definitely, I would agree, it's like a huge problem, and in the States, in particular, where I'm from, we've seen employee stock option programs really sort of they seem to be stealing a little bit of the thunder from the worker co-op movement. But I definitely see that this is also something that happens in every corporation and throughout the private sector, that anytime that a company comes out with an innovation, they have to really work hard to either find some way of locking down that innovation so it can't spread to other companies, or else they just keep innovating as fast as they can and keep up the tempo ahead of their competitors. Since the co-op movement as a whole has no hope of locking down its innovations, is tempo of development really, is that going to be the only place where the movement can hope to retain the perceived value of its innovations, or is there maybe another way that we can go about that? And then also, what do we need to do as a movement to maintain the speed of our innovation?
Well, thank you. Those are all excellent questions, and it's lovely to hear someone from that program on the line. I think there's a number of ways that we can approach it. My first reaction is to say that I think it's a very good thing. It's not that co-ops want to have intellectual property rights on their innovations, I don't think. They're social innovations, because ideally, and this is maybe a personal thing as much as I think it's a movement thing, that it's ideal that we spread social values to the economy. And I think given the nature of worldwide crisis that we're experiencing on a whole bunch of fronts, it's crucial that those innovations spread faster. So I actually think it's a sign of the success of co-ops that people are incorporating their innovations. The problem, as you point out with ESOPs, for example, is that those innovations are being appropriated part way. So the history of employee stock ownership programs is generally that the employees lose at one level or another and subsidize profiting by corporations. You can think of Algoma Steel or other examples where that's been the case. So the problem really to me is that the social values aren't instituted within an organization fully, rather the sort of the marketing component of them is taken over by groups who aren't really interested in the depth of the social values that are being articulated. But it's true that regardless of how one feels about that, that co-ops are in a more, and I don't like this word, so I'll put proverbial scare quotes around it, but in a more competitive ethical marketplace right now. And I think one of the ways that they have of being able to articulate their difference is what I said in a piece that I wrote a few years ago, and it fits well with what Laurie is talking about, is the idea of ethical value added. And that the idea in the paper that I wrote is about, for co-ops and organizations, I'm talking about fair trade co-ops in this case, to structurally build into their planning continual growth in social delivery, social value delivery to their members, to the community, whatever, as I said earlier in answering the earlier question, whatever the field is that they've identified, asks themselves the question, how are we going to expand our social value? And it allows real flexibility for small co-ops, big co-ops, whoever, to plot where they are now, see their strengths, as I think Laurie's talking about in social accounting, being able to measure those, but not stopping there, but looking at saying, well, like a corporation looks at increasing profitability, how do we increase our social, or as I say in the article, ethical value added? And I think by that process, co-ops can stay ahead of the curve, if you'd like, and innovate, and also demonstrate that it is possible to truly to do well by doing good, or do good by doing well. And I think that would increase the speed at which people adopt a more socially focused economic activity.
Thanks so much, JJ, and for your question, Justin. I just wanted to highlight also that I pulled up on the screen there some information on another tool. This relates back to the question from Fred. What kind of tools do we have to measure these kinds of things and keep these conversations top of mind within cooperatives? And within our research network, there are folks in the Atlanta cluster led by Dr. Leslie Brown of Mount St. Vincent University and Peter Huff of the Canadian Worker Co-op Federation, as well as Co-op Atlantic, who are testing out some tools to do just this, to be able to have tools that serve as a bit of a strategic planning process template for co-ops to use that really hone in on how they're operationalizing their values. And so this tool has been modified for several different types of cooperatives, and is still sort of being experimented with and modified and refined. So you'll see the link at the top of the page there. Certainly stay tuned. There's lots of activity happening all the time. And also this network is looking in the next 2 years to put together a tools forum where we will, in fact, bring together folks like JJ and Laurie and folks across the world who are looking at measuring the co-op difference and also this idea of operationalizing what it is that we know anecdotally is different about cooperatives. Okay, so I'll hand it over now to Sonia. You have a question. Please introduce yourself.
Hi, I'm Sonia Ryan with a credit union in Nova Scotia and also a recent grad of the Masters of Management Cooperatives and Credit Unions program at St. Mary's. Go Huskies. My question is for Professor McMurtry. I had the pleasure of being in Mondragon and seeing what a true cooperative economy looks like, which was really, really quite fascinating. And I wondered, shortly after we returned, we heard about the collaboration between Mondragon and the U.S. Steelworkers, and I'm just looking at your discussion point there. You talked about Mondragon having some limited success, I guess, with their collaboration efforts. And I wondered if you could elaborate on that at all, or if you happen to know where they're at with that particular collaboration.
Sure. I had the pleasure of also visiting Mondragon too long ago now, 2 years ago. Lovely place. But it's really actually kind of a tricky answer to that, because I have some background in the union movement and some friends in the steelworkers, and I'm working on a different research project with some folks from there. And the understanding of a lot of the people in the steelworkers is that Mondragon is proceeding with this agreement, and there was rumor a few months ago that there was going to be a big announcement and they were going to move forward with some projects. But when I was in Mondragon, also have contacts there and talked to people periodically from there, the perception from Mondragon is largely that from at least the people I talked to, that there's difficulty especially around capital, and where is the capital going to come for the very large-scale projects that have been dreamt about when people write about this combination between Mondragon and the steelworkers. And one of the problems that Mondragon has is that because people look at it and say it's a multi-billion-dollar cooperative with global reach factories in China, India, Brazil, et cetera, across Europe, at the cutting edge of technology, it's like our corporation and they can do anything. But Mondragon was built on very cautious and strategic investment in industries that they know they can succeed at. And so the linkage between them and the steelworkers is a difficult one, not the least of which because they're unsure exactly what they're going to build. Don't want to be in an employer relationship. They want to be in a cooperative relationship. They see that as being the success. And it's very hard to, as they say, transmit the culture of Mondragon to other locales because everywhere is different. And so they've really, as far as I understand, struggled with groups that they're making arrangements with to have that culture work in other locations. And I edited a book with a colleague of mine, Daryl Reed, about international cooperation, and there's a chapter in there by Greg McLeod and Daryl Reed on Mondragon. There's some interesting information there about the attempts to cooperativize, for example, the Brazilian, if I remember correctly, Brazilian bus factories, that there's resistance to cooperativization by the workers who want to maintain a worker-employer relationship. So it's a very interesting problem and one which is exciting to see. And if it happens, I think would fit very much what I'm talking about cooperative innovation, the ability to be able to transplant that culture somewhere else while maintaining the individual culture of the location where you're operating in. But the limited success is big announcement and not a lot of activity. But that could happen tomorrow, which I'd love to see.
Right. That's interesting that you say that, because I do recall them talking about the sometimes the challenges in translating that culture to other organizations, less so in kind of the immediate area. The other thing I was really surprised, I guess, to see was their commitment to research and development and kind of ongoing innovation with Ekerland and things like places like that. And that's something I think that we need to see over here more so. On another note, I wondered if you had any research available or anything on this alternative energy cooperatives that you're working on. And Nova Scotia could sure use another solution.
Well, we're looking at Nova Scotia, and I'm not sure if Judith is on the line, but we should be releasing a bunch of things through the CCA. You'll be able to find them on the website, and there are some things up there already, if I understand correctly. So Judith and I are finishing up some pieces, and they should be available soon. But the preliminary research is already available, I think, on the CCA website.
Great. Thank you so much.
Is that true? Am I lying, Erin, or is that true?
You're not lying. I've got it right here, actually.
Good.
Okay, thanks so much for that, Sonia. We do have a couple minutes left, and I wondered if we could ask the question to folks who are participating today. If you're part of a cooperative or working with a cooperative, could you share with us if you have any practices in place where you bring up the idea and these concepts of measuring your social impact or your environmental impact and how this plays out in your decision making? Is there anyone on the call who can speak to that or even give small examples? Oh, you can press *2 to unmute your phone, because so far we can't hear anyone. That's okay. You can go ahead and raise your hand if you'd like to contribute to this, and I can call on you. But certainly we've seen it in a number of different ways in terms of people who are measuring through their strategic planning process as cooperatives, and we see this a lot in the credit union movement as well, that folks are bringing these types of discussions into that strategic planning framework, and that they're checking in on it on a quarterly basis, for example. So we have seen quite a bit, especially at CCA here when we're sort of looking at the landscape of co-op governance across the country, that we're seeing examples where people are certainly making an effort now to report on this in their annual reports and at their annual general meetings, and that it's coming more and more into the discussions around the board table. So we want to keep tracking this and making sure that we can share these examples with other folks so that they can start incorporating these discussions as well. So to finish, I think
Laurie, there's another example that I can maybe give from the United States as well. This is a trade association of organic food producers. It's called the Food Trade Sustainability Leadership Association. So to be a member of that association, you also commit to produce an annual report, a sustainability report, and the guidelines for this report were determined by all the members of the organization. So they came together over a period of 3 years to decide what kind of a format they wanted organic food organizations to report in, and they came up with 11 different sustainability areas. So it's another interesting example of a group that's come together to develop a social accounting format and then actually put that into place for its members.
Thanks so much, Laurie. And also we have I believe it was in May, this research network hosted the Co-op Metrics group from the States, who is a worker co-op that does work in managing metrics and helping co-ops to capture metrics. And they look at not just their numbers, but they also look at their social impact. And I think the biggest discussion that came out of there, and that all the information from that, including the video, are now available on our website. But what came out of that discussion is that folks were struggling with this idea of how could they measure social impact and environmental impact. And so often people say, it's really easy to look at our balance sheets and see if we're doing better than last year or how we're doing when we look comparatively at other organizations of roughly the same size. And Co-op Metrics basically was able to open the dialogue with folks to say there are really concrete ways that we can measure social impact, and we just need to think more in those terms. So is it looking at our gender balance, and that comes down to counting numbers. Is it about how many young people we employ? Is it about how many people show up at our AGM and participate in that conversation? Is it how many events we do in the community, how many dollars we put towards social ventures, and that kind of thing as well. So I think that these are ways that we can start to incorporate this kind of accounting as well. It's getting away from that notion that it is more challenging to capture the social, but rather look to these great examples of how we can go about doing that. So JJ and Laurie, I'll open it to you if you have any closing comments.
I just wanted to say thank you so much to Laurie and to the CCA and to the people who have attended the talk. Thank you, and please feel free to contact me. I don't know if my email got posted there, but you can find me on the York website, and I look forward to any emails if people have lingering questions, and thanks again.
And I would like to say the same. Thank you also to the CCA, to Aaron, to JJ, and everybody on the call. And especially for those in cooperatives, if you want to contact me to get further examples or to ask questions, I'm very open to that, and my email should be at the end of the presentation as well.
Thank you so much to Laurie and JJ. And I will make sure that the PowerPoints are posted on our website later today. And there'll be links from the main page there under webinars and events and opportunities. And also, as soon as we get the video ready for this within a week or so, we'll make sure to post that as well so you can go back to some of the content and also share it with your colleagues. I will just note there on your screen, you'll see that we do have this our next webinar coming up November 15th, and you can go ahead and book your spot today and let your colleagues know. And thank you again to everyone for participating. It was great to have the questions at the end and certainly to be able to reflect on this. So thank you and take care.